The Razzmatazz Festival. Has anyone been to Razzmatazz Festival? Which showcases new, upcoming local talent, stories, poetry, music. Oh, I don't know if
He's
the
moving
mental
in.
health.
He's bloody moving in, look at him.
I'm moving in, boy.
The mental health of the,
All right. I'm going to do, because you've had lots of music, and I play lots of music, but I'm not going to play lots today because I'm going to mix and match a little bit. So I do a bit of performance poetry, a couple of songs, and a couple of very short readings from two books that are out there. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I do like a bit of participation. It helps me. Thank you, Gareth. I love the Chaz and Dave Hillbilly. That was brilliant.
It's good, isn't it?
Especially seeing as Chaz that passed away yesterday.
Yeah.
Good. Right. There was Gemini Jim and Scorpio Sal. They were living by the Golden Gate. They was freezing their nose and wearing leather clothes and dealing every way but straight. They had a Leo dog and a Capricorn cat, and everything was going fine till into their life on a moonless night came the man who got no sign. He stormed right in on an evil wind, and he rolled himself a righteous smoke. And as the thunder flashed and the lightning crashed, he took a toke and spoke. Said he was born on an astrological warp where the moon refused to shine. On the cusp of now and nevermore came the man who got no sign. Now Pisces Ben, who was Jim's best friend, said, "Man, you must be blind. You better take your knife and take the life of this man who's got no sign." And then it happened. And the blood soaks the ground. The arrest was made by Sheriff Slade. He was an Aquarius through and through. But the jailer, he was a Sagittarius, so he beat Jim black and blue. They marched him up the courthouse stairs. They said, "Jim, how do you plead?" Jim said, "Hey man, the moon's in Virgo, the blame can't lie with me." Now the jury all were Libras, so you know they were more than fair. But his lawyer, he was an Aries, and Aries just don't care. Well, the judge, he was a Cancer, and Cancers have few friends. But the hangman was a Taurus, and that's where the circle ends. I've lived up in the Swansea Valley, just down the road from Gareth's house, for about the last 18 years. Well, not 17 years, 16, 17 years. And when I first moved up there, bought this sort of farmhouse type place that was a kind of semi that had been bumped, and was really unhappy there. Really, really unhappy. Didn't know why. Had to get out of there and moved as the crow flies 300 yards right up the mountain on this plateau, this really isolated ancient cottage which was haunted. Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, and it didn't materialise till some time later, the guy who lived in the house I first moved into was a fellow called Morgan Lewis, who was a under gamekeeper for R.D. Goff, who in those days owned the valley. And the fella who lived in the cottage I moved into was a fella called Di Davies. He was a poacher and a little bloke, and everybody loved him. Everyone loves a poacher. Di killed Morgan in 1850 on the 25th of February. And I'll relate the story with a little bit of a reading and a song. Stuart, I have to thank, because when I discovered this story, the first thing I did was to write a song, wasn't it, really? And I will tell you this before I go any further. The house was haunted, wasn't it, Stuart? Big time, big time. Real shit. Oh yes. Now Morgan Lewis when he was around, was malevolent. He wasn't nice. His energy felt bad. There are people, sadly not here, who can witness it, but there were people who visited me in the cottage and had experiences themselves. One lady, for example, was washing up one day, a friend of mine's wife, and she felt this dig in the back, a nice gentle dig in the back, and a little voice, woman's voice in her head saying, "That's my job." And I did used to come downstairs and things had been moved around in the night and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, Di killed Morgan, right? There's the farmhouse, there's the cottage, there's the chapel. In the chapel graveyard, and the headstone is still there today, it says, "Here lies Morgan Lewis, whose life was taken by a stone, thrown by the hand of David Davies." And years ago there was a sculpted hand on top of the headstone pointing up at the cottage. When I finished writing the song, I couldn't get a last line, and it took me, seriously, I wrote the song in maybe a week, but it took me a year to find the last line of it. And the night that I did find it was very early in the morning, and when I sang this last line, which you'll hear shortly, the whole atmosphere changed. Morgan appeared again, only this time, not malevolent, smiling. And Di appeared on this side. Oh, I can't say time. I played the song, I sang the last line as they'd appeared, they disappeared. The house was clean. They never came back. I can't tell you how bereft I was. What did you say to me at the time? Stuart did a whole radio programme, which was about nearly an hour, wasn't it really? Which was done along the same lines as Down Your Way on radio 4 years ago, wasn't it? On the trail on the Battle of Penny Grag. It's worth listening to. It's on, the whole story's up there, isn't it really?
It is.
Anyway, without more ado, I'll set the scene for you before I sing the song. Since I've had my cataract accident, I have to wear glasses to bloody read. It's terrible. It's called the Ballad of Penny Grag. A poacher leaned against the foot of a large sycamore tree, staring at the empty snare on the moss in front of him. Nearly on the cold, wet ground, icy from the winter night, nearly done, our poacher picked up an empty snare, examined it closely. Strands of hair and fur stuck to the snare, stained with blood, now frozen from the early morning. No doubt in his mind, young sharp eyes quickly scanned the forest to the left, right and in front. Turning quickly, nobody to be seen, only bare trees and shadows. Listening in silence, there was nothing unusual or untoward to disturb the end of night and the beginning of a new day, excepting the distant bark of a dog fox echoing through the forest. Perhaps this vocal carnivore was the thief. Frozen evidence held firmly by his icy fingers informed our poacher of a rabbit once caught, now gone. Foxes often raided snares, snatching the helpless victim, but the disturbance on the ground and the fact that the snare had been undone to release its prisoner informed him that the fox was innocent of this crime. Gently our poacher stroked the ground where the snare had lain throughout the night. Blood specks in frozen suspension splattered across the snare's residual image indented on the earth and moss. Slightly off to his right, 2 large imprints of boots were clearly frozen into the moss. Similar prints faded on the solid earth off to the left. Our poacher mused and muttered under icy breath, "If the thief was that fox, it was on 2 legs and wearing huge boots." Bare trees offered no shelter from the biting January winds. Pulling a woolly muffler around his neck and shivering, he got to his feet. Putting the empty snare in the bag that was hanging from his shoulder, sharp eyes took a last look at the scene in front of him. This was the 7th snare found empty this morning. There had been 4 yesterday that had suffered the same fate, and also a number over the last couple of weeks. Our poacher was being poached. Spitting on the ground, he cursed under frozen breath and turned towards home with an empty bag. There would be no rabbit stew today. Heading for Penny Grag Farm, he trudged through the forest and down the mountainside. A thin layer of snow covered everything as far as the eye could see. The sun was starting to rise, but the cold perished our poacher to the very core of his bones. Adding to the increasing sense of anger and frustration, that invaded his every cell. He knew that somebody must have been following him and springing the snares. But who was it? He was angry, very angry. As the morning mist started to lift from the trees, our poacher, Di Davies, walked through the farm gate. Jenkins and Big John were eating breakfast when the door opened with an urgent creak as the rusty hinges held the gusts of freezing cold, morning air drifting in. Their little brother Di stood in the doorway. "Shut the bloody door, Di!" Jenkins spluttered crumbs across the breakfast table. Di slammed the door shut behind him, but caught himself on the handle, creating searing pain in his cold fingers, still numb from nocturnal poaching. Di swore under his breath and kicked the door in return for this assault upon his person. "Take it easy, Di back. Too early for temper." I finished. You can clap if you want, mate. It sets the scene for you. Di, in short, got extremely pissed on the 25th of February and went up against Morgan Lewis 3 times in the village, witnessed by loads and loads of people. And on the very final time he went up against him, he hit him with a stone, small stone, jumped up. Di was 5'7", Morgan was 6'3". Di jumped up and hit him on the head, right in the middle. Morgan smacked him again, sent him on his way. 3 days later, Morgan was dead, went into a coma, died. Biggest scandal ever to hit the Estrabun Valley. There's never Estrabun Valley. There's never been one as big since. And in those days, if you were done for manslaughter, which Di ended up being doing, you would have gone to Australia. That was mandatory, you know, transportation. Ooh. But Di had consumption, so he didn't go. He got 3 months in Swansea Nick. Which, of course, in 1850 was no holiday either, you know. It's called about the penny grind. Well, 8 o'clock in the miner's arms on a cold and wintry night. Morgan Lewis, a gamekeeper, not a man you'd want to fight. Well, 39 and a wife and 5, tied cottage on a hill, waiting for Di Davies, who he would surely kill. Well, Di, he was a young man, 5'7" or more. From the age of 9 in the ironworks, he trod the factory floor. At night he went a-poaching, all in the forest, you just why. But on that fateful night, Morgan Lewis, he would die. Well, money passed between them, and only they knew why. Di stepped up to Morgan, throwing blows at his eyes. Well, Morgan stepped aside, picked Di out from his shoes. Fist struck far and wide, a fight should lose. Job it. Diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Well, the miner's door flew open, Di's body crumbled through. Morgan stood a-laughing, his words beating true. Well, the little man stood a-panting, blood dripping from his head, and a big man screamed at him, "Stay down or you'll be dead." Well, Morgan stood a-drinking, glass empty on the bar. Friends at night a-drinking said, "Back, you got too far." Well, turning his head and singing beneath the northern star, well, Di lay wait for Morgan behind the Donner's bar. Well, Di saw Morgan coming, stone in his hand to run, screaming like a fox hunting Morgan Lewis, I'll come. If last I'll do, I'll serve you, a poacher beaten Bill. His words are ringing most so true there on a Pantate Hill. Diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Diddle-lie-diddle-lie, diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Jumping at Goliath, stone locked, cracked bone. Brothers Jenkins and Big John carried Bruce die home. While Morgan at home lay bleeding, in pain upon his bed, while the doctors came a-purging, but by Monday he was dead. Well, 5 o'clock on the Monday night, the priest of Pennygrag came, arresting that awful fight, it's murder just the same. Well, the coroner sat in the new sworn in, friends and witnesses true, manslaughter the verdict's in 3 months, but I took 2. Well, sadness, guilt, so hard to tell, once 2 proud men, lost in a history of hell, if and now and then. 150 years since that fateful night, was so much pain and many tears, now angels both in flight. Diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Diddle-lie-diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die, diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Diddle-lie-diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Diddle-lie-diddle-lie-diddle-lie-die-die. Now angels both in flight. Dining out on this story for quite a while now. And thank you, Stuart, for all that. I really do want to thank Stuart, because I mean, this song has been #1 twice in the last 3 years in the Reverb Nation folk chart, and it also came joint first in the Doncaster Song Folk Festival songwriting competition. So if Stuart hadn't encouraged me way back, I would never have done any of that. So thank you, Stuart. Right, I finish off. I don't want to bore you too much, right? I'll finish you off with our latest masterpiece. Right? My good lady wife over there, Debbie, is an illustrator, and she illustrated the little hair she did, so she did. That was our first attempt on it in the Ballypenny Gride. But in the latest one, Crack Fin and the Prophecy, she illustrated the whole thing. Right, a little bit of background. I'm a nutter, okay? I've been writing and creating all my life, just like everybody else here, in one way or another. So when I finished writing about the Penny Grag, I wanted to write something else. And I wanted it to be different and something I'd never done before. Now, some years ago, along with Stuart and a few others, I was involved with the Sleeping Giant Festival up in the valley, which used to happen every year. And one year, my band and I, Lazarus Carpenter, we were top of the bill, so we thought we'd better write a song. So this is where it started, really. This is where the story really started. So I wrote this song called The Wine Glendower, okay? Well received, wasn't it? So, and I'm thinking about writing. I mean, I can't write about it. Everybody writes about Glendower, you know, and I'm a Yorkshireman, what do I know about Welsh history? Not a lot. Well, at that time, anyway. So, I decided, following year, after this thing at Sleeping Giant, Jimmy Juggler and I wrote a children's play called The Fiery Knight's Tale, and it was a pantomime thing which we did at the Gower Heritage Centre during the summer season, and I played the part of Crack Finnant, who was a dwarf on my knees, like, narrating the pantomime. Okay. Now Crack Finnant was a dwarf, and he was a prophet and seer to a wine Glendower. Okay. Rode with him for many years on campaigns and everything else. But in those days, of course, everybody had a poet or a seer and a prophet. You weren't anybody if you didn't have somebody who could see what was coming. Generally, I was going to do wrong, wasn't it? But anyway, so he was a character from history who was right for me to do something with, because nobody knows anything about Crack Finnant. Iola Goch mentions him once in the big red book, that he was a prophet and seer and a dwarf, and he rode with Glendower. That's it. So I thought, right, okay, this is it. So I sat down and I created the beginnings of what is now 3 books now, in fact. The next one's with the editor, and the third one is already been written, but getting written. So Crack Finnant, right, as I say, a prophet, nobody knows anything about him. So I started with, well, what are we going to do? I know. What we'll do is, he's just finished his apprenticeship, and he's 25. And he's been with Clwyd ap Crack and Clwyd, his own master and teacher, for the last 10 years, learning to be a prophet and a seer. And his old master wakes him up one morning and he says, Crack, the old boy. Only not probably quite lad. He probably said in a Welsh accent, wouldn't he? Crack, you wake up. That's Irish. Never mind. We'll get there eventually. So, he announces to Crack that he has now got to leave the comfort of his little mountain home up in Powys there, and all the little caves and everything he knows, and make his way to London with these sacred scrolls, which hold the prophecy. Now Crack, who's a dwarf, and a prophet and a seer, can't speak English. So he doesn't know what he's going to do, but he's dispatched anyway, nevertheless. So on the way, he decides, because he's been informed he's got to join a travelling circus, you see, so, and become a performing dwarf, which goes down with him like a brick in a swimming pool, because, you know, he's a dwarf, he's a prophet and a seer. He does not perform, and certainly not in a circus. Well, he doesn't want to anyway, but he decides he'd better become a dumb dwarf, because he can't speak bloody English very well. He's a Welshman. So to cut a long story short, he finally gets to London. And this, the first volume, The Prophecy, takes you up until the point where he's met Glyndŵr at Lincoln's Inn by accident, after having met him a couple of years previously, again by accident, whilst he's a performing dwarf. 30 rejections on the manuscript, looking for a publisher last year for this. I've got to share this because it's so wonderful. It's changed our lives. And in November, we saw this competition online, you know, a writing competition, holiday book competition, been run by an American publishing house. So we sent the first 3 chapters, and then they asked for the rest. And then Debbie looked at how many people had actually sent stuff in, and it was like 4,500, you know, so we said, oh, forget that then. We never looked again. We wrote off the $25 we'd sent, and we forgot all about it. Didn't even vote for our own book, and in February we were told we won first prize, which was a full publishing contract and agency representation, all the rest of it. And inside 3 months, it was out, and it's been on the market for about 3 months now. Doing quite well. And the second one, Rise of the Dragon, is now with the editorial team, and that'll be out soon as well. And the third one, Ravens and Dragons, is underway. But what a wonderful universe we live in. Here am I thinking I'm going to retire now, wind down. No, baby, you're going up again. Here we go. Right, so. Can I give you a little reading? Quick, short one? Don't want to take up too much time. Where's the glasses? It's not cataracts I need, it's a new bloody brain transplant. For many, many years, I could see no further than the end of my nose, and had to wear glasses for everything, apart from reading. Now it's the other way around. I can see for bloody miles, but I can't see in front of my nose. So, here we go. Where should we go? I like to just pick something out, you know, without necessarily thinking. Ah! This is a nice scene from when he's actually in the circus. And if the glasses had stopped falling apart, I'd get there. You see, this is the problem, Stuart. When you get to my age, nothing works anymore.
Too many spare parts.
Next year, Stu.
He's not that far behind. Our cue to the stage rang through the beat of Wasp's drum, and with utmost surprise, my legs ceased to quake. And, as if no thought was required, I stepped in front of the crowd for the first time in my life. I was a performer, and here, now under a full moon, my strength would be proven to all who could see. Crow played a jolly jig, accompanied by Wasp beating loudly, drumming rhythmically. A strong man and I lifted a wagon high in the air. I lifted a large wooden wheel with one hand above my head, while Strongman swung an enormous iron ball at the end of a short chain. Round and around his head it went. I was really starting to enjoy myself. In fact, it is true to say that I had not had as much fun in years, and the applause seemed to make it even better. Energy coursed as a fast-flowing river through every cell of my small body. This small body is such a state of concentration, and yet not, showed strength equivalent to that of 3 full-sized men. Our combined strength, phenomenal as it must have been to watch, seemed easy to us and required little real effort, simply concentration with ease. Our finale of strength was near. Wasp crushed the drum as smoke washed across the stage. Strongman stepped into the centre and bellowed at the audience, requesting 6 volunteers to step forward. Well, between them, there was every shape and size imaginable standing with us on the stage, all 6 of them waiting, fidgeting and twitching, perhaps wondering what sort of experience to be remembered for many years to come was about to take place. Strongman took hold of 2 of the men by the scruff of their necks in his left hand. One was as round as a barrel, the other well-built and muscular. In his right hand he held 2 very plump men, bloated by ale and pie, faces flushed purple. I knelt with arms outstretched, laying my palms uppermost on the ground, beckoning the remaining men. Each stepped onto my hands, and I felt their weight, heavy at first, as indeed they were. In my mind I could see feathers floating, and I began to feel their lightness. Wasp and Crow began a merry tune, and together Strongman and I lifted our chargers. He lifted his. Their feet dangled helplessly, one man lifting 4. I took a breath and raised my arms with a man precariously balanced on each hand. Straightening my back and legs while standing up, I took them higher and higher. The audience was wild with excitement, and the drum beat resounded in our ears. Our finale over, we stepped back into the smoke, leaving the volunteers now with feet back on the ground, seemingly lost and forlorn. Pale Man quickly helped with shaking men off the stage, urging them away into a waiting crowd of backslapping friends and family. Circus Master stepped forward. The applauding audience clapped louder, almost frantically encouraging more of the same. Raising his arms, gesticulating a need for quiet, slowly the audience responded and became calmer, settling in for the main finale about to unfurl. He raised his arms as high as it was possible, waving at the audience, golden ring on gloved hand, glistening in the moonlight. Friends, parents, children, people of Shrewsbury, we, the Magic Travelling Circus, invite you all to join in song and dance. The audience cheered and screamed for more. Dwarves, strike up the music. He waved towards Crow, who, beating his drum 3 times in succession, began to dance. As Wasp tootled his flute, music filled the air, and the audience began to sway from side to side in time with the melody. The performers sang from behind the stage as the music became louder and louder. Thank you for listening.
I'm going to introduce myself now.
There we are.
Yeah.